of Wavestone. I work in the sector of cloud, and I will be chairing the roundtable. The topic that we're discussing today is cloud. Is interoperability a necessary step towards digital sovereignty? I am happy to have 4 participants. I will start from the left, Laurent Allard. He is the strategic development of VMware. Hubert Tardieu, independent member of Gaia-X and ex-president of the administration committee of Gaia-X. Alban Schmutz, strategic VP of OVH Cloud, president of CISP and old member of Gaia-X. And Vincent Coudrin, he's with Denum. We will take about 40 minutes and then about 20 minutes to take questions from here or from or remotely. To start, I would like to turn to you, Hubert. It's important to talk about the vocab. I often with our clients, I talk with my clients of interoperability. And why do we talk here about interoperability? What's the difference between one and the other? Thank you, Etienne, for this question. Interoperability and portability are at the heart of the difficulty and the challenge that European and French companies have to adopt the cloud. But the concepts are really different one from the other. Let's start with the simplest one, portability. For those of you who have been around for a while, you know that when we were constructing mainframe apps and we wanted to go from mainframe to Bull, we had to rewrite them. So portability, we all understand what it means. These are applications that have been written for a cloud. How can it be used for another cloud? It's also portability of data, how data that was stored on a certain cloud can also be stored on another cloud. And finally, these are the infrastructure, and Alban will talk about this later. So this is really the basis. No one wants to go in the cloud if we don't have the guarantee of a minimum of portability. The reality is that today in Europe, only 26% of companies use the cloud. This means that there's really a big difference between Northern Europe, like Sweden, Denmark, where they are over 50%, and the countries in the south, including France and Germany. Germany is 20%, France is 21%. So it's mainly related to this question of portability. The real question is, why do we want to include transition these applications in the cloud? The first reason is that we have fixed costs that become variable cost, and we want to save money. This is quite normal. If we just stop at this first advantage, we forget that what is very important for Gaia-X is this idea that in order for Europe to be sovereign from an industrial point of view, it is essential to organize the sharing of data within health, energy, within manufacturing. Basically, many different actions are taking place. For example, Catena-X, which has within it main automobile builders within Germany that are creating a specific space for data. Philips in terms of health. All of this shows that at some stage, if we want to have sovereignty in terms of health, in terms of automobile, it is essential that we share data. And in order to share data, we go from the idea that if the data is in a center of calculation that is hidden and we can't share the data. But the second principle is that each of the big companies that we're talking about has the responsibility to choose its own supplier for the cloud. A very simple example, Philips, that has shared data for health, is one that historically has been using AWS. If they want to work with hospitals that work with other cloud suppliers, the interoperability means that we are able, independently of the choice of cloud suppliers, to share data in a way that allows to have common spaces for data. Interoperability pertains to data, obviously. This is the main aspect of it, and we'll talk about that later. This aspect of common data, and we don't need for the data to be next to each other, one next to each other. This is quite important. It's also interoperability for the applications, for the APIs, application program interface, that is really part of interoperability. So portability is the first break for people not to go on the cloud, but if people don't think of interoperability, then we're missing out on one of the main advantages of the cloud. Thank you. So we understand that this is really a European subject on data. Alban, what are European initiatives on this topic? Thank you, Etienne. If you understand the difference between portability and interoperability, we also understand that there's a technical need to put this in place. There's also a law framework that is applied. When we talk about portability, today the DGPR includes parts of the portability, that we would have to be able to transition our data to someone else. This is already part of the DGPR. I'll talk about this later. This was applied in 2018. I don't know what's your experience now, but the portability of this personal data today is still something that's not very present. It's not as obvious, whereas it's already part of the regulation. So it's really a technical topic, because if we have a law that imposes something, but that we don't have the technical means, then we have to wonder if things are proper or not. Regarding personal data, we have this rule, this norm, but there's another regulation that's on personal data, that's on portability, that's on the free flow of personal detail in Europe. In its 6th article, talks about portability of non-personal data, and there are some objectives in terms of what the industry has to apply. So in the same way, for personal data, it's not really in production. It's not really in place in a very easy way for the whole market. This is on the easy part that Hubert was talking about, on portability. On interoperability, which is much more complex, the question is, how can we make sure that a technological solution that could dominate the market, because we have some different types of technological solution where we have 95% of the market. How can we make sure that we can interoperate with this technological solution, not to be excluded from the market and not to be excluded from the producer or the editor of this application? So within the European regulations, there's something going in this direction. There's something about the Digital Markets Act, which is a huge initiative of the new European legislation, which is trying to create some obligations for main operators of the market, the main gatekeepers, which are really dominating a specific market. And in terms of interoperability, they will be more open so that other actors in the market, especially the smaller ones, can have solutions with better and more equitable conditions in the market. So this will be really a huge step forward in the legislation. It's a priority of the European Commission, and it's also for the French presidency of the European Commission to bring this to our attention. I will stop here because otherwise we go into too much detail. But there is a technical topic that's very important. There's a part of a legislation that's also very important, because if legislation is not there, then what we saw in the last 30 years, it doesn't happen naturally. So legislation really has a big role in this. And where this ties together, and we see this in this example of Gaia-X, it has to be operational, and there has to be a technical counterpart as well. Thank you. In what you mentioned earlier, Hubert, you talked about sovereignty. In the question, we talk about digital sovereignty. Is there a difference between the two? So the ambiguity is the fact that the word digital sovereignty could mean two things. The first, what is the sovereignty that we could obtain on the industrial point of view thanks to the digital? But it could also mean, what are the possibilities for us to have digital solutions where we are completely sovereign? So these are distinct. Vincent will probably talk about this later. These are complementary, but they are often seen as opposing each other. Some of you remember not so long ago where France really had in its mind to become sovereign from a digital point of view, building not only one but two cloud suppliers, which were Numergy and Cloud One, if I remember correctly. A lot of money went into it, and in reality, nothing happened. It didn't give any outcome because investments are huge in this field. So as a summary, for us, and talking as on behalf of Gaia-X, the first important aspect is to have industrial sovereignty, facilitating the exchange of data in big domains. And the first thing it means is that we treat on the problem of interoperability, and it's not a bad solution, but it's limited. We do like Boost Aerospace, that is Safran, Airbus, and Dassault, sorry, where we imposed that it's the same supplier of cloud that should be used by everyone. So we could say this is obviously a solution that is simpler, but the actions of the cloud are such that it won't be possible in most cases. And so what is most important, and the actual plan that we have to relaunch this, is to increase significantly in companies the digital aspect. What it also means, more or less, is to go from 26% of companies that use cloud to about 50% in the next 4 years is really something that's coming. But we're not doing it because we don't want to do it to have a digital sovereignty, but rather to have an industrial sovereignty, giving a few rules for this game in using the cloud suppliers that are coming from different service provider of cloud. So we're giving a framework, as said Alban, with policy rules and of how the cloud is used in terms of portability and sovereignty. So this ambiguity, and we can talk about this later if you want, that has been really notorious at the beginning of Gaia-X, and really showed itself with the question, and I'm sorry for Laurent, why did you accept VMware, Alibaba, and AWS in Gaia-X? Because you're perverting the objectives of a sovereign cloud. Our answer was permanent and constant. We would like, first and foremost, that the cloud penetration doubles in 4 years in Europe, removing the obstacles that are preventing it, that are preventing cloud to be adopted as part of industrial sovereignty. Vincent, maybe you will be able to tell us more on the strategy of the French government. Last May, there was an announcement on the doctrine of the use of the cloud by the government. It has probably changed a lot in the last few years. Can you tell us more? Yes, of course. The question of a sovereignty for a state is quite literal. It looks like it was invented for us. It means that no one is above us. It's the biggest one in the room. The idea is that you can't unplug you. There is no other administration or judicial system that could ask for accounts of where your data is stored independently of your control. You shouldn't be restricted to one solution. You should be able to get out of it. And if you do all of this, you can be sovereign, buying, I can't say VMware, but it could be under your desk. And you have to be able to access these most modern technologies and have a bit of coercion. And these are all parts of sovereignty, action autonomy, which is associated with sovereignty. So for all these reasons, we have created, and last 17th May it was shown, there is a concept of a trusted cloud that has 3 criteria, which are really trustworthy cloud measures. So it's a technical certification that's under the ANSI that will make sure that there is absence of leaks of data. We have immunity to extra-European law, so we can't have a legal right that's outside of the owner of the data. And also, you are not subject to the open data, because otherwise you're exposed. So these are the 3 criteria for the trusted cloud, which is authority in terms of using clouds for sensitive data of the government. So this, and to put it within the strategy perspective of the national strategy for cloud, we have to remember what are our stakes. The stakes are to change and to transform and to modernize within the state and companies for France. Gaia-X, for example, it gives the opportunity to European companies to access within the rules of the European market to the most recent technology to launch them in this race. And the other stakes that we have are the sovereignty ones, and the two are one against the other. There's tension between them, because if you limit your capacity of transforming by sovereignty, you are really putting yourself in a situation that you have this battle. So we realized that we had to have a third pillar to the strategy, and I will talk about the cloud in the center later, how to put forward to bring about a quality sovereign cloud that will allow us to have it in all dimensions, including modernization and projection of capacity of action. So we built this doctrine with three pillars, the idea being that we should put a framework on how to use the cloud that should be trustworthy solutions, as I mentioned, with these three pillars. We have to sustain the idea of a European cloud. These are more national measures. So this goes together with the Ministry of Education for the industrials in Europe, and also the measures of the relaunch plan that are linked to cloud. The doctrine of the state that came out on the 5th of July 2021 says two things. The first is that cloud first. The cloud is at the center. The cloud means DevOps, means product, is really the posture for production of numerical services for the state. So I would like to believe that this is quite revolutionary. The second and within this same category is that we have a problem of human resource. It's nothing new. The third is that we have to put it as part of the governance of the digital activities of the administrations, otherwise nothing will happen. So this is really the heart, is the pivot that will allow us also to integrate this transformation within the program of the action. The second part is the way in which we're restricting ourselves to use the trustworthy cloud for data of the citizens, of the companies, because of the government, because obviously the data is transparent, and obviously there's the classified information that's quite separate. But this tool looks at the transformation, but also is really directing the public command in a trusted ecosystem that brings about its value, brings up its value. Thank you. A small question. Is the need for sovereignty the same everywhere? Or, as you were saying earlier, are there types of data that are different? So we have applied the obligation of using a trusted cloud. So it's an immuno rights cloud that's European with open standards to all sensitive data. So for citizen data, company data, for statistics and their business, health data, that's also part of this criteria. So this is a lot of data, obviously. We have chosen also this because we also decided to have it as a tool of public command. So we have a good vision of the state, from the state point of view. Laurent, perhaps as you talk to clients in the industry, you can tell us more about the industry viewpoint. Do you share this state view? Thank you for this opportunity to share this situation, which I would like to say it's difficult to understand, even though you might be in the heart of the topic. It's not really easy to understand, to read this. So first point, if we look at the market in Europe, if we look at the cloud infrastructure for your data, the part of the market of the American hyperscalers is 70%. So in Europe, your data, 70% of the case will be in the three big hyperscalers suppliers in the US. So when we talk about sovereignty and the need to go further and be aware that we can feel that's becoming more important. In Europe, there's really a challenge with this respect, with what it can bring in terms of local resources when compared to these 70% of hyperscalers in the US. So what we see, if there's a higher demand, the state obviously is really taking a big position on this, but finance and health, many sensitive data that we have in digital transformation, all the industrial sector brings this worry, this concern that's very strong. And so we have two things that we realize. On one side, on the demand, and on the offer on the other side. So on the offer, on the question of sovereignty, each week we see a solution that's using words that, oh, we have a solution that's wonderful, that's responding to all our needs. And is this really what we need? It's not really easy to determine. There's really a need to clarify for the market what is really being exposed to the limits of a sovereignty and what is not at all. So just to show how complex this is, we talked about SecNum. SecNum, I know this because I was within this with OVH because it's a partner of VMware. It's based on components that are with American parts of Intel and other suppliers. And VMware brings the stack on which this offer is given. So we see that the complexity is really in conformity with Signum. So it doesn't go against the Cloud Act, but there are really technology breaches, and that's where the sovereignty in terms of digital capacity to give all the components against giving a sovereignty with all the results is quite clear, because we can obtain the answers to the expectations of the field if we put these parts together. In other sectors, we see announcements with assemblies. You saw, for example, last week, or even this week in Germany, and in France, Germany, and in Italy before, there are big American companies that put together services. For many decision makers, we're quite confused about does this bring me. So these obviously bring many answers, but does it really give all the answers of the requirements that we need? Not really. So there's really this whole way of reading the reality with Gaia-X that is a huge work project to be able to read the reality and to simplify things. And it will simplify things from the offer point of view. In terms of the supply and the demand, it's not 100. Should we stay 100% European, or should we go 100% hyperscalers? We see the trend to have a multicolored approach, to recognize the different sensitivities we have in terms of workloads, to say, well, this here perhaps is less critical, and I want to use advanced functionalities in terms of AI and other PaaS functions. And in some other solutions, I really have a lot of requirements and I need to use a local supplier. So really we need to find these solutions that reinforce the options of interoperability. Thank you. We saw in the first part with Gaia-X that it's an actor that's trying to weigh and help the market evolve. And Hubert, maybe you can explain the strategy, how Gaia-X is trying to weigh things, and what are some of the victories and the evolution of the market, and how you see it in the market today and tomorrow. What are your expectations? We're in an environment, as we said earlier, that's really moving, but the success is really important for the position of Europe at the end of the relaunch plan that we're trying to put in place. So we shouldn't make any mistake on the choices that we're taking. Gaia-X is, first of all, a grouping of 11 German companies and 11 French companies in 22 companies that have suppliers. 7 of them are users and 4 are associations or universities. And Gaia-X has built this whole scheme that is today in place that says a coherent element of cloud suppliers in Europe, but also US cloud suppliers or Chinese ones could find themselves, could gather, meet up, and define what will be the policy rules and the architectures, the reference architectures, and the different standards that has to be in place. So as we speak today, Gaia-X has about 300 members. It's something that was really important for those who started it. Alban was part of it. It was really important to have enough resources so that Gaia-X can give a certain direction without be submitted by a government or by some members that might use it as a lobby tool. And so this is where we've reached. We have the capacity now to give all these elements that allow users to engage themselves on a cloud strategy with these difficulties of portability and interoperability.
What about Gaia-X? Well, it is original. You can't find it neither in China nor in the United States. The highest part is the creation of common data, like the health data gathering. So we agree on sharing specific data. The lower part is the infrastructural part, and we provide ourselves with the means to have this technically feasible. The characteristic of it is that this the closeness between the highest and the lower part is that it develops differently in the United States, where I guess that Microsoft, Google, and Amazon try and organize the creation of data spaces in health or in other fields, if you wish. So that's one issue. Second is we realized it was important in Europe, and the issue now for Gaia-X, whereas Catena-X want to have a first visible implementation for the end of this year, are we able to provide them with the adequate policy rules in order for Volkswagen and others to work together and share the data? Are we able to provide them with the reference architectures? Are we able to provide them with the tools they need to set up these platforms? So, in a way, we are lagging behind, and if Gaia-X does not provide these elements, Gaia-X will be there will be someone else doing the job. It was not foreseen in the beginning, but we were stakeholders in the spending that will be done in the relaunch plan, 750 billion euro, that will be, among which a part will be dedicated to the digital. The digital minister in Italy called me and asked me how should we spend these 20%, 12 million euros. The same goes for Portugal. So today these stakes are high. This spending on the digital will have to be done in the coming years, in the 3 coming years, but in the right direction. We won't have a second opportunity to do so. Sorry, we can't hear you. Hubert, you talked about policy rules. We hear about cloud rule books. Alban, I'm not sure everyone understands these notions. What are the differences? We can't hear you, sir. I'm sorry. Sorry. To complete what Hubert just said, the European Commission asked the industrial stakeholders to suggest an investment plan, which was done a few months ago. This is why the European industries suggested a roadmap with 19 billion euros. There are proposals on the table, and these documents are public, so please consult them if you're interested. To answer your question on cloud rule book, I'm not sure everyone knows what we talk about. Well, the topic, what is the topic we try to address here? The question is, how can we operationally transcribe European values? We talk about portability, interoperability, security, data protection, climate neutrality, all these European values that characterize us not only naturally but also in the regulation. How do we make these operational? We can do it 2 ways. Well, first one, stakeholders on the market, field operators gather and agree to develop rules that apply to them. And we talk about self-regulation in that case. It is done on a voluntary basis. Another way to do it is to wait for a regulation to come out, and this is imposed upon the stakeholders. What are the policy rules of Gaia? It's the rules that have to be applied. How can we demonstrate, how do we organize the protection of data in Europe? Of course, we have to abide by the existing rules, but we are not obliged to be European stakeholders to be part of Gaia. So you're not, it's obligatorily under the European rules. So I'm the chairman of CISPE, Clone Infrastructure System in Europe, and we deal with such protection within Europe. And we, in Gaia-X, to demonstrate that we meet these expectations, we can rely on this label, which is given by a third certifier, which is independent and that can certify it. So there are several elements that can be debated, the issue of security, for instance. And Gaia-X decided there to rely on the certification, the European certification, when it will be operational. In the meantime, we can rely on qualifications or certifications that already exist. We can talk about C5 in Europe, for instance, and do it with existing market tools. But all the stakeholders may agree on saying that it works. On the other hand, the cloud rule book, the idea there is to put on a road book. It will be the combination of different rules that already exist among the regarding the cloud. These elements can include things that have been developed by the market, but not only. So the difference is at that level. The link with the topic of today, the issue of sovereignty, it is absolutely essential here, because the issue here is how can we make a management decision operational? The decision of an industrial or a state user. So I must be able to take a data from a provider A or to a provider B. So I have to solve this if it is not possible. So it's a multifaceted issue. The technical capacity is part of it. And then there is the issue of compliance. But we could also add the software licenses. There are technical constraints there, but also such constraints. CISPE launched, for instance, with a partner, a charter made of 10 principles for fair licenses in the cloud, so that there is no monopoly in the field. So it's a multifaceted issue, and what Gaia-X tries and does is to try and work on this ex ante. That's what CISPE is developing. And on the other hand, the Commission is trying to afterwards to try and recognize the best practices on the market. Hubert said earlier on that a little more than 20% of the customers are in the cloud. We often hear about a multi-cloud strategy. Figures are shared on the field. My client may have as many as 11 different clouds. Well, the figure is correct. 11 is the medium now that you can find. I'm talking about all the cloud services. So it was 8 2 years ago. But the implementation of interoperability is quite limited today. If you have a look from the level 0 of the solutions, the architecture is quite separated with different silos, with no exchanges between what you can get from this provider in relation to others. It does not take advantage of the information from one customer. So the architecture is still in silo, and platforms do not interact the ones with the others. Then among big accounts, there is an integration to make sure there is a good operation between different entities. So one user should not have different identifiers. So if they change, it's going to be easier. So there is this first level of interoperability that can be done thanks to specific tools to simplify operations. The third level, that is at the disposal of the companies, for which we see it is not very much developing, to share these data in the company, avoiding overlaps, redundancies, databases, etc. So here we are in the different activities. There are tools, but they are not very much implemented, and very often they are under a star system. In that case, the existing cloud is in hybrid interaction with each of the partners, but in a star configuration. The most advanced level is the opening of the interoperability with the ecosystem of the company or the public service. So you go beyond the borders of the company, but there are many issues of security there. But also there is the issue of understanding the content, because there is no such idea of what is a client. And BMW and VW are not the same companies, even if they produce cars. The way they envisage things is different in terms of supply chain, etc. So Gaia-X defines per sector common definitions so that these exchanges may be smoother. So this was a synthesis of the different steps. These are the tools that can be done, and Gaia-X want to go higher in the interoperability of the systems. Thank you for your vision. Thank you, Laurent. Vincent, you shared the cloud strategy of the state. Could you provide us with your vision of the state and maybe vis-à-vis other European partners? Okay, I'll be direct. The issue of multi-cloud, you will find it on all papers. You'll find it everywhere in the DSIs of the states. Italians today this week published their strategy, and they talk a lot about multi-cloud. The European Commission had done the same. For us, the multi-cloud is a doctrine. Multi-cloud for us is what Laurent said. It's the idea of sustainability. If you have legacy issues in the mainframe, if you have internal cloud, and we must have it for data we do not want to be elsewhere. If you have different levels of sensitivity, Well, you have to use the management of configuration, etc. And so you're at the heart of the multi-cloud. That's what I understand with the Gaia-X that will provide us with the technical tools to manage this. All the states have a reflection on the multi-cloud. Everyone has an opinion, but the opinions differ. It's the issue of sovereignty. There is also the issue of sovereignty. There is no official definition and no European definition either. And these definitions may differ a lot. Most of the time, the states rely on law. We added new technical constraints with the cloud, with the data exposition, and not only the threat of the exposition of data. Today, we try and have the European referential converge. We all contribute to it. What we can observe, and there was an announcement this morning, a partnership between Google and Deutsche Telekom. They will create a cloud for the German state, which echoes what happens elsewhere in Europe. So there is a trend to stick to the sovereignty constraints that are expressed at national level. Actually, we have to make do with this in our efforts to, in our consultation efforts at European level. What we want is to be big enough so that the providers do not provide a state-level solution. So we might interpret such announcements as something which is to be addressed. Thank you. Interoperability is increasingly present. Laurent, technologically, we are able to do it. We have solutions that go in that direction. To open a new prospect on different solutions and what technology enables us to do in terms of opening to multiple choices, before we had simple models. There were two categories: a few hyperscalers and local stakeholders, which were much smaller and which wondered whether they were big enough, etc. They might feel isolated, etc. So there was a simplification of the choice between bigger ones or very small ones. There were few medium-sized ones, but actually there was a simple choice between a small one or a very big one. What we realize is that the fact that there are new platforms enabling new exchanges with the existing and the new, well, these technological platforms help the connection between the bigger and the smaller providers. If we connect these with the existing tools, we may find an alternative tool. That's an opening that can be implemented and that is currently operational, that enables to divide the work between different providers. So in a German-French system with OVH, it gives you a lot of strength. So imagine a division of your data in a continuous operability. Well, it is operational, and we'll have a communication on this at the end of this month. So this alternative plan organization is really interesting, and that solves the issues of sovereignty but with geographical constraints. So these represent complementary solutions. We talk about interoperability of infrastructures, but today we realize that there is an explosion of data. Some stakeholders try and capture these data. Isn't there an important stake here with data interoperability to answer this question? Sovereignty. What is sovereignty? There are three leverages: legal, technological, and economic. The first one is to master the legal framework that applies. The technological one, do we master it? There are different ways to master it. Do we produce everything locally, or do we have the necessary conditions to assemble the bricks and have the possibility to master without producing oneself? And then economic, that's what Vincent said earlier on. We need to have stakeholders that are big enough to bear this sovereignty. We need to have a European market, for instance, for European stakeholders. So these three conditions are important. And to answer the question on data explosion, to master the added value from the data sharing, you need these leverages. You need European stakeholders, European market, and you need to crystallize it. These three leverages have to be implemented. So the Gaia-X project is important because interoperability is at the heart of the creation of value. And the majority of the creation of value in Europe goes out of Europe. It is captured elsewhere. So what we try and solve in Gaia-X, how can we facilitate the exchanges? We need interoperability. And how can we create value and change the very center? Not to stay in 90-10, but to go to 50-50, for instance. I would like to give an example. Let's take agriculture and the explosion of agricultural data. Well, you have agricultural equipment manufacturers who have local data on farmers. Okay, they have these data, and to use these data, farmers will have to pay. Maybe one day they won't access these data, and there you see that the fact to impose these interoperability, and it's not only portability, it's the idea to be able to use these data. It's important in any sector. You can talk about defense or aeronautics, but in agriculture, it's also true. We still have a few minutes left. We might have a few questions in the room or distance questions. Nobody wants to ask a question? Well, thank you. Thank you for your intervention. I wondered what would be the impact of Shrimp 2 on the cloud. Excellent question indeed. I understood that Mr. Schrems was in Lim today. I will listen to him later on. In one word, the stakes of Schrems 2 is that actually The European Court of Justice decided that this was not possible to only rely on compliance directly operated by cloud operators, and that we had to make sure that data were controlled directly by European stakeholders. So this made things difficult for the operators because all the uses that are made of American or Chinese clouds are illegal. What is more difficult is that we do not know how long it will take for this to settle down. So we are in a legal void, which is quite concerning indeed. The beginning of CISPE was to say it is indispensable for European data to be stored and processed in Europe. As Vincent said, so that if someone does something we do not want, we can just cut the power. And second, to impose that the data have a guaranteed pathway. And Gaia-X asks for a Schrems 2 label, but also that no data, if it is sensitive, can go through Ukraine or North Korea. Today, we do not have a technical answer to that question. To complete what has been said, we are here in extraterritoriality conflict. Legislations outside of Europe will have an impact in Europe because Chinese or American law say we must have access to European data. And on the other hand, the regulation is also the GDPR regulation can apply in Japan or Australia if there are European data. There is a multiplication of these regulations, which are conflicting regulations. There is no international multilateral resolution that could address this issue. On the short term, we do not know what kind of solutions we could find, really. When we discussed with the CNIL, it's the answer to the end of the privacy shield. The answer with the privacy shield was that we need new criteria that you can activate, but we are in between. We're only on drafts, and we do not know on which side things will go. You have to be aware that the Swiss, who are quite sensitive on the fact that financial data should not leave their country, they are currently experiencing a new protocol that would guarantee that the pathway of the data may be determined upstream. So the storage and storage of data and processing of data should occur in Europe, but operators should implement this science protocol. One word To conclude on this topic, there is an issue of extraterritoriality of regulations because different countries consider their role as different. The balance may be different from one country to another. But what has to be added is that in the international exchanges, data need to be exchanged. It is part of the negotiation, commercial negotiations, trade agreements. So the services in charge of commercial negotiation, well, it's a competence of the European Union. These negotiations can deal about data, but on agriculture or other services or other sectors, or internally, our vision, we have a certain legal vision, maybe also conflicting within Europe. So it is quite complex. And the decision of the European Court of Justice clarifies the fact that there is an issue, a problem to solve there. Now we have to solve it. If there are no more questions, the last question, and then we will close the session.
Do you think that with the F-Data Hub, that interoperability can be a limiting factor? Because you talk about storing also in terms of the European law, but also in terms of the data hub, we talk about French data. Is that a limit? Do we need to work with other foreign countries in Europe instead of just storing in France? I think that the question is for me. So data at the moment is stored in France, probably. I think so. But without going in detail, it's quite technical, and we really looked closely on the decisions of the Council of State on all of it. But if we talk about legislation on the nature of data and protection and so on, there's nothing really to say about that. So they're not with Microsoft, they're not here, they're not there. On that point of view, the greatest risk, if there was a risk, and it's not for now, there has to be a huge amount of data. It could be a risk that the data could be exfiltrated towards the US so that US actors could have value on it before startups and researchers in France. Now, it's come to our attention that there's also a political aspect that, the French data is being manipulated by the US. WhatsApp, no, not WhatsApp. Insta, not Insta. And so the question was, what are the conditions that have to be met so that an object that's so complicated like the F-Data Hub can be protected and on technology that's 100% European? The national strategy for the cloud was built in response on the question of the F-Data Hub. And I'm quite comfortable saying this, that it would have been very difficult, extremely difficult, and my colleagues will recognize, it would have been very difficult to build on 100% French technology on the conditions, the way it was done. And that the real question is, how can this be done? And so we're working on this. So I'm saying it because it was announced by the ministers, so there's nothing secret there. But how will we find a framework that's really strong, that cannot be attacked from a sovereignty point of view, that will be addressed from a political view, and how we'll be looking at it from in France for the F-Data? as you're talking about me, I wanted to respond to the question that it would be extremely difficult to build this on French technology. The topic is, if we knew what we wanted to do, we might have been able to evaluate whether it's possible or not. The question of the specifications is that if it's not just knowing the cost of the infrastructure, but the markets that have access to the cloud, it's in conformity with the direction we want to take. So you take a small team, you give them access to the whole catalog of the cloud suppliers, and they have access to APIs, and they develop incrementally the product. So this idea of having specifications, of course, we can talk about this for 2 hours, just to say that as when we were told it's not, we can't do it, and we say, what can't you do? Well, we don't know how to answer that. Maybe we'll close the topic because we're going away from the initial topic. But perhaps another answer also is that what's on the Data Hub is not available to everyone, so it's within a framework. Thank you to everyone in the hall for having been here. Thank you for the 4 participants and panelists. And have a good end of the day. Bye-bye.